Okay, so welcome everybody. So this is the fourth version of our annual meeting. It's been a little bit of a organisational challenge to get this going with holidays and things. So bear with us if things seem a little bit chaotic. But I just want to sort of start with a brief description of what ORSO is, because there may be people here who this is new to. Essentially what we are is a collaborative group of scientists who are interested in reflectometry as a technique, and we're interested in improving the technique and spreading the word around the world. So specifically, we've got various projects. There's various working groups which we'll discuss in detail later. But we're trying to define standards, make reflectometry measurements more reproducible and consistent, and make sure the analysis is also consistent, so that people can do better experiments. And then we need to educate people around the world on those methods and provide a useful resource for people who do know what they're doing as well. That may be familiar to quite a few of you. So basically, the meeting that we've got this time around is slightly different from the previous incarnations of this session. Again, we're on Zoom, but we're obviously operating mostly in the European time zone. So we have morning and late afternoon, evening sessions here. The idea is that at least some of that will be in a time zone that is suitable for everyone. We accept that that's not going to be possible for everybody, so we're going to record as much as we can, and we'll put that on our new YouTube channel, so you can catch up when you're out of sync with a session. Then we've got kind of three types of session over the week. There's plenary sessions like this, which are essentially where we're going to have the AGM shortly, and we'll also have some scientific talks and discussions that are of general interest. Then we've got some kind of discussion sessions, which are shorter sessions, which are based around specific topics of interest to each of the working groups. Those are chaired by whoever cares most about that topic, and they essentially the idea is to have a general discussion about those specific issues. And then the final part is we actively want to get people involved in ORSO, so we're going to run some sort of active sessions. Sometimes they're called hackathons, but that can be a bit of a scary term if you're not into coding. So what these are essentially is a session where people turn up and actively do something. So we've got one this afternoon where we're looking at educational material. The idea is to actively contribute and write some educational material in the session. So each of those sessions are much longer, and the idea is that if you turn up to those, you're going to actively do something. We might split into smaller groups and work in small groups to achieve particular aims. And exactly what we do will depend on who turns up and what they're able to do and willing to do. So those sessions kind of break down like this. We've got the session now, and then a couple of plenary sessions on Thursday and Friday. The kind of working group discussion sessions are again Thursday and Friday, and then the active sessions are kind of front loaded. So we've got one this afternoon and two tomorrow. For the full schedule. I think that most of the details are on the ORSO website, but there's also a sort of limited version on the Indico registration page where you got the link for this Zoom session. So for this session, we're going to start with a talk from Wiebke, who's going to tell us a bit about the DAPHNE project. So again, we want to collaborate with other projects who have similar interests. So that's why we've invited Wiebke here to tell us about that. Then we're going to look at ORSO which will be the first kind of major output from ORSO as a collaboration, and Jochen will tell us a bit about that. And it's important that we pay attention there, because that will tell us what we're going to be voting on. So essentially what we want to do is have that as a release, and to do that we want the approval of ORSO, and that's not just the 8 chair people deciding that this is a good thing, it's the whole of the interested people. So we'll have a vote on that, and I will tell you about how we do the voting later. In the AGM, where we will sort of have a general discussion about the organisation of ORSO in general, and where we go from there. So, Wiebke, I think that means it's over to you. So, yes, I don't know, maybe Bridget, you can introduce Wiebke a bit more, better than I.
Yeah, well, Wiebke Lohstroh is at TOM, and she's also very active in the ML-Z reactor. She's been an expert for reflectivity, working on RefSans and on other beamline, reflectivity neutron beamline instruments for many years. But we know each other because we work together in the DAPHNE for NFDI project, and that's the topic of Wiebke's talk. Then Wiebke will tell you all about what we do together in DAPHNE. So Wiebke, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Also, my reflectivity days, these are quite a bit some time ago, but I did do some reflectivity measurements. Still in the 90s. Bridging to 2000, but that's about it. So I try to get it on the screen, and I hope you. Yes, it should work. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the DAPHNE project, which is the acronym for Data for Photon and Neutron Experiments, and which is part of a large German national initiative. And as Bridget said, I'm at the neutron source in Garching in Munich. Yeah, where we produce quite a lot of data, and that's our interest. And we are collaborating inside Germany with quite a number of university groups and large-scale facilities to improve actually a bit on the data management side of data coming from large-scale facilities. To put it a bit in perspective, so the NFDI, which is in German Nationale Forschungsdateninfrastrukturinitiative, it's something like the National Research Data Infrastructure Initiative, aims at the systematic exploitation of valuable research data across all scientific fields. So it's not confined to natural sciences, but it also includes humanities, it also includes medicine, it also includes health. So cultural heritage, it should in the end form some kind of basis to really have access to all research data that are produced inside Germany. And the organization is such that there's a German Verein, which is an association, the NFDI EV, that has been founded in October 22. And it coordinates across all the scientific areas and the so-called basic services. And to date, status May 2022, we have about 216 members of this German Verein. So it includes universities, Max Planck institutions, all kind of research institutions inside Germany. And then the actual implementation of the project is through so-called research area specific consortia, which is then a funding schemes, which is running for 2 times 5 years. There have been already 3 calls in total. So we have a first call in 1919, where about 9 consortia had been funded, and they started their work in 2020. There have been a second round where 10 consortia have been funded, started last year in October. And among these consortia funded at that point in time, DAPHNE for NFDI was one of the funded consortia. There's actually a third call ongoing, and the start for this last consortia funding period is foreseen for the 1st of January in 2023. So in the end, the idea is to have around 30 consortia that really cover all different aspects of science in Germany to make sure that data management and data become more fair. And the cross-consortia coordination activity is to be happening via the NFDI EV, the overarching verein. So I try maybe to have something like a laser pointer. So DAPHNE, as I said, is a consortia that looks after data for photon and neutron experiments. In total, we have 18 partners, which come from university user groups, which come from large-scale facilities. We are closely in contact and have sozusagen KFN and KFS on board, which are the user representatives for neutron and synchrotron research in Germany. So Committee for Research with Neutron and Committee for Research with Synchrotron Radiation. We have an additional 60 participants without fundings who are just interested in contributing. And we had a first kickoff meeting in December last year where we sort of initiated the work, and it's a bit sad to say, but we are still in the process of finding and trying to fill all the positions we got within the funding project. So these are all the partners that are members of DAPHNE for NFDI, and I also listed here the task area leaders for the different topics that we are addressing. So as you see, Bridget is part of one of the task area leaders, and we are co-leading the task area 1, which is about data collection. I'll tell you a bit more about this later on. But you see, we have DAISY, we have university groups. So it's a mixture really of people who provide the means at the large scale facilities and the user side that is actually using and producing the data with their research. Of course, I guess most of you come from large scale facilities, so you might be well familiar with it. But it's nevertheless worthwhile to recall what we're actually talking about. We have about 8 sources of large-scale facilities in Germany, about 33 in Europe, and 94 sources worldwide. And so these are the numbers for Germany. There are about 3,000 experiments conducted every year by about 5,500 users, and it results in about 3,000 publications, which are linked to research at large-scale facilities. And of course, we have quite a number of data that is produced, especially with the development in detector technology. And of course, these kind of data, they really need to be managed to make sure that they can be reused and refound in a proper way. So also the way we are working needs to be evolving a bit. You're also quite familiar with that, I'm pretty sure, but nevertheless, I would like to recall it. So we tap with our methods, providing neutrons and X-ray scattering, photon scattering methods, with the different techniques, so imaging, tomography, reflectometry, of course, is one of them, diffraction spectroscopy. We tap in quite a number of research domains, and of course, with that, we tap quite in a large number of societal challenges. So while we are united sort of in what kind of methods we provide, we of course cover really a very broad range of application. So it's also clear that one size fits all for all these different research domains and for all the different societal challenges in terms of standardization will not fit. So DAPHNE is also quite a lot about making sure that every part of the community gets along and is included in that kind of so if we talk about data management, so we have to talk about the what is called the research data management strategy or data life cycle. We all start with a proposal. We capture some data, which contains, of course, metadata that describes somehow the experiment, that describes the instrument. We get some data, hopefully from the control software, about the actual environment parameters, and they should be stored in a certain type of format. Ideally, we document our workflow and the measurements, how the experiment is really run. Not everything works always as planned. And of course, we would like also to have as many parameters from our instrument and the sample environment available in electronic form so that we can put it together afterwards. Once the data are collected, you have to somehow curate them, validate, store, and archive them to make sure that everything that you conducted during your experiment is accessible and you can understand it later on, not only your current PhD student, but hopefully 3 generations later as well. So you need to have access about it. And then you start working on your data, you visualize, you process your data, you have to analyze them, and finally, hopefully you publish some results, which you then can link to data that have been stored in a data catalog that you would like to access. And ideally, along this process, all the data you generate, you store, and you curate should be adhering to the so-called FAIR principles. So that's the final aim of NFDI, to make all these data that we produce in Germany fair. So FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So we need to make sure that while we collect this data and process this data at the large-scale facilities, we have had sufficient information that later generations can work with it, know what has been done, so that they're able to find it, so that they're ingested in some data catalogs that can be accessed, and after an embargo period, possibly also the researchers who are not the primary principal investigator. Once you found your data in a catalog, they also should be accessible. In a sense, you should be able to download them if you have the permission rights. Interoperable in the sense that you know actually what has been done to collect these data. Yeah, so it's to make sure that all the information that is needed to either recreate the experiments or that is needed to analyze your experiment is there. And that, of course, forms also the basis for reusability. Coming from this very general data lifecycle at a large-scale facility, I just want to show a bit where the different bits and pieces are that we need to connect. Quite a lot of them, of course, is already available, but we need to connect them to make our data sets full. It all starts with a proposal which describes the aim of the experiment, that describes the instruments, the facility, the proposer, who's the principal investigator, and what kind of sample is supposed to be measured. We do the experiment and we collect, and at most instruments, of course, we already store the instrumental settings, we store the sample environment, we know who the experimental team is, who's on site or maybe working remotely. Then we conduct the experiment, and of course we have some kind of documentation. Some places a bit more in electronic form, in other places it's still a sheet of paper and a pencil, which might be prone to get lost at a certain time. But we also do some kind of preliminary analysis and have some comments. This sample worked exceptionally well, or the sample came out quite dodgy when it got out of the beam. Also, that is information that is needed for later use. And of course, from the outside, we have something, the user brings a sample to the large-scale facility. It comes with composition and geometry history. And of course, it has something that happened outside, a characterization and some pre-characterization before. Once the experiment is conducted, we do, of course, some kind of reduction and validation steps. Has the instrument worked as we thought? Is that the valid data set that we really want to analyze? And then we start analyzing. Again, we have some input from the outside. We use some analysis software, the version, and sometimes something of a quality assurance. And we might combine that with other methods, theory and experiment, to finally get to a publication. And all these things basically need to be combined if you want your data set really fair and transparent for the outside world. And of course, we collect quite a lot of that. We have proposals, large-scale facilities all have some kind of user office system where all this, in a broader sense, bibliographic data is collected. Who is going to be at which instrument at which facility? We have quite a number of things that come from the instrument control software. We also have some kind of analysis, data reduction analysis software that is, I put it here like a home institute, but of course that's something that the user group really does with the data. And they also bring the characterization, the sample, and also results of other methods. And all these we would like to assemble, put together, and put something like in a repository for the raw and the process data. We also would like to have repositories for reference data, analysis scripts, the software that has been used, that needs to be put together. And according to that, we organize DAPHNE according to different tasks, which is one is the managing data collection. So everything that's concerned within the experiment, we would aim or try to introduce electronic notebooks at the instruments and for use at the home institutions. And it also confirms or contains work on high performance data format, and also getting a grip or some identification for the samples. So if we put persistent identifiers to the samples to make sure that we have a unique handle on the sample that actually has been measured. In the second task area, we will concern ourselves with the metadata repositories and catalogs. Especially that the data that are aggregated or collected at the large-scale facilities finally get assigned to the UI, so that they also can be found back. We are interested in first the facility data catalog, but the final aim is, of course, is to have some kind of overarching federated catalog access that we can search across different catalogs, which samples, which experiments have been done at the different institutions. Then, of course, there's one task area which is concerned about the data and software reuse. So not only collecting the data, making sure all the metadata is there, but also making sure that the infrastructure for the analysis is there and also available and well documented later on. And that, of course, opens up the pathway also to apply much more generally machine learning methods if we have a standard, more standardized data storage and data access. What I also gathered from your introduction about ORSO, it's a lot about education and training, all the tools that we hopefully are going to develop should be disseminated, especially also about younger people, establish something like best practices. So that's also the task of DAPHNE, so to spread the knowledge within the community, and also work specifically not on like general features, but make sure that we test and work on specific use cases to actually implement best practices, and also software development, use and reuse. And the final one, again, is the final task area is about communication and policy. As I said, DAPHNE is embedded in the NFDE association, and we are tapping in quite a number of research domains. So we also would like, it needs to be sort of coordinated and communicated with the other consortia that might be using experiment at large-scale facilities, that might be using photon and neutron scattering experiments. And of course, we need to adhere to their standards. So to be a bit more specific about the task areas, so task area 1 about managing data collection. So the aim is to further specify metadata standards. There's quite already some effort going on within the PAN, like photon and neutron community, to get specifications for the instruments, basically mainly about the Nexus data formats. So having a set of metadata describing your instruments that is needed to further work with the data. But of course, all the other things that I showed, what comes from the sample side, what comes from the sample history, about documenting your experiment conduction in electronic form during the experiment, so have electronic notebooks, and also to further improve the automatic capture of instrument and sample environment data, or define standards how to do that. That is still things that are in progress. So these are all topics that we are going to work with in DAPHNE, and we started off discussing quite intensely about what the requirements, for instance, for electronic notebooks for the facility side and also from the user side should be. So what should be provided or should be available at during the experiments, and how can we take this data home or integrate them in the home electronic. And we also started to have some initial tests about from available solutions, but that's sort of work in progress. But of course, it also means that we need to get some agreement on the minimum metadata that are to be collected for certain type of experiments. And there, one of the use cases that we're going to work on is, of course, reflectometry. And that collaboration with ORSO is, of course, very well needed. The second part is the task area 2, as I said, the repositories and data catalogs. So especially from the raw data side, well, in data providing side, I would say, from the large scale facilities, we are working towards a federated and interlinked data repository for the participating facilities. So first of all of us need to have some sort of catalogs that can be accessed from the outside, and not all large scale facilities are already minting DOIs, but that's part of the DAPHNE project that we are going to introduce. And again, we need to agree on the sets, the metadata we want to search on, so have a common interface that can address to all the catalog systems that will be used. And that, of course, implies that we have to further specify and work on metadata standards, which is a minimum requirements to describe anything like that. And one of the really big tasks where's not so much done yet is having sample PIDs to get a sample description and have a unique identifier for various kind of samples that come from very different research areas. So again, not one size will fit all, but we need to collaborate and communicate with the specific research domains that we are tapping in to make sure that we can interlink the information they have about their samples and what they think is mandatory and the minimum description, so that it will fit well with our data collection schemes. And of course, it's not only about repositories for processed and analyzed data, also used for reference databases, for instance, in the EXAFS community, but it should also be a repository available for the analysis program, so that can be transparently followed up how data have been processed and analyzed. And in the very end, instead of looking for metadata, I want to see everything that has been done on a reflectometry instrument on iron or iron multi-layers, whatever. You might also want to open up the pathway to also search for, like, inside your data. So having really some idea, I have a spectrum that looks like that, please find other spectra that look similar. That's a long way to go, but of course that would be one of the very final ones. Then we have this task area 3, where we look for the infrastructure for data and software we use. And it mainly is concerned about the curation and deployment of analysis software on, I would call it like cloud-like infrastructures, so that it is available from user portals from the large-scale facilities. And it also hosts basically analysis software that is to be developed from the user groups. So to make sure that people have access to like best practices and the latest version of the software analysis tools that are used in the field. Again, opening up like automized data analysis chains and open up easy access to best practices for sustainable research software development. And if you want to set up these kind of user portals, of course, you need to make sure that you have all the proper access rights, all the embargo periods and all these things well in place for the different facilities. So that's something which is, again, a common effort, providing the analysis software tools and deploying them for further use between users and the large-scale facility. I said it's a lot about, so task area 1, 2, and 3 are really about the technical realization, but it's of course also a lot about communication. So to make sure that these tools are really used, distributed, further developed, it's a really common effort between users, power users, facilities within the NFDI, other research domains, different collaborators, the research or scientific community overall. So we will have quite regular meetings. We have workshops. We try to get some kind of young researchers network in place that works along these schemes. And also, I guess that's one of the most important part, try to establish data management as part of the curriculum during the education of the younger researchers. And especially Bridget is very, very active to promote that. And I think that's really important to make sure that all the things that we are going to develop is really sustainably planted inside the community and gets further developed. So to get like the concept of fair data into the curriculum and what it really means and what kind of techniques are available, that's something we need to really work on and push. And I also said we start off with very general terms, what we all want to do, it's all fine and fancy, but when it comes down to it, we start with use case specific areas where we would like to work on. I listed all those which that we identified, where of course our personal background comes from. But of course, one of them is indeed interfaces. We have different part where reflectometry really taps into. So we focus first on these things. That's where we come from, and try to work from there. And finally, in task area 5, I said external communication and policy. That's our outreach to all the other organizations which are concerned or working towards getting data fair. So we have about 30,000 synchrone and neutron users worldwide, so it's quite a large number to communicate with. Of course, there are also all these interfaces and interlinkages to the other NFDI consortia. So especially close to DAPHNE, which is for the photon and neutron community, is FAIRMAT, which is more coming from the condensed matter material science community. We have the material science network MATWERK. We have astrophysics. We have NFDI for data science, but also coming from the health and biological areas, chemistry, catalysis, engineering. So we need to have communications and collaborations, common workshops, working on common use cases together. And all these activities sort of started with initial kickoff meetings, discussions going on. So we are pushing towards that, but it's well in the fledgling state. And then, of course, we have the larger organizations. We have LENS and LEAPS, which is the organizations that organize the neutrons and the synchrotron sources across Europe. We have European projects, which already started working on these topics, XPANS and PANOS. PAN data is a precursor of one of those. Of course, we have ORSO that we are communicating with. And then we have the European User Association, ESUO, and we have ENSA for the neutron side. And of course, with all these, we need to keep contact to make sure that we are developing nothing which is then not accepted by the communities. So it's not so much getting new things, but collecting what has already been there and working further on these tracks. And that's what I wanted to tell you about DAPHNE. As I said, the project started October last year. The initial duration is about 5 years, and we are closely embedded in this NFDI association. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.